Got it.
Okay, so it is wonderful to be back with psychiatrist Robert Sands, who has 40 years of experience in psychiatry dealing with children, adolescents, and adults. He's seen over 100,000 clients. Okay, and today our subject is something very close to my heart, very, very close to my heart, and it's spiritual masculinity. Um, that's my term, divine masculinity, spiritual masculinity. We're going to be talking about why boys are reluctant to kind of want to grow up and be men, the kind of danger of toxic masculinity. And this question I asked you about who benefits from emasculating men. It's a very disturbing place that we find ourselves in this world. So I'll be very interested to hear your opinions on that.
This is a go.
This is a go. Go
All
for
right. So there's a lot there about masculinity. I think of it as a boy, a baby boy born on a path, a trajectory into the future, and what that looks like and what they come to the world with. What's the difference between boys and girls, men and women, and that's been worked out pretty successfully. There's many dimensions to that. Probably the most striking one is that boys and men tend to be interested in things and ideas, and women are interested in people. Now,
it.
whenever you put a trait onto a group, there's obviously exceptions, but those are average differences. And so if you see a boy, they're born with a drive. I'll introduce some words. One might be epigenetic, which means you take your genetics and then the world modifies it. And as the world modifies your genetics, then that modifies your path. And so you're on a trajectory. And boys have intrinsic, inborn drive that frequently is associated with testosterone, but it's more than that. But the testosterone's important, and it creates a creature that's got some interesting qualities. As you watch boys grow, they have I'll pick from the tree of terms: grandiosity, drive. They're shame avoidant. Shame is an important human. We all have shame, but boys don't want to be ashamed. The famous psychologist Erik Erikson talked about, for boys, and actually girls too, industry versus shame and guilt. He created these choices, or in your trajectory of growing up, you're either overtaken by shame and guilt, or you have industry, you have self-assertion. Now, what helps that drive and self-assertion definitely is testosterone and a motor drive. A motor drive is like a drive for activity, movement into the world. Now, certainly there's boys that like to sit around, as we know. Even if they're playing video games, there's action, but you might say passivity versus activity. And
Interesting.
so in healthy male development, you want to have that physical energy that pushes you into the world and frequently causes risk taking. I mean, this is one of the core traits of core masculinity, is the willingness to take risks.
Okay.
And you might say, well, for what? I think it's fair to say that boys want to earn the love of their mother, their parents, and any little girl whom they give their heart to. And they start showing off. and they want to be bigger and they want to be better and they make up stories. And so that leads into fabrication, grandiosity, puffing oneself up to be bigger in order to serve what? In order to serve the central principle of humanity, which is the Earth Mother, the love of the mother. The first love, what's called the love object, is who? Big surprise, it's the mother.
Wow.
And so little boys have to figure out what to do with their love of their mother, if they're lucky to have that. And not all little boys have that feeling or attachment, but most do, and it's considered normal. It's normal. Little girls love their mother too, and this creates a different path, that girls love their mother, and if they're lucky, they learn to love a father or a male figure that launches them into what's called normative sexual development, where they would be able to love, fall in love, which is, you can talk about love a little bit. So maybe I should pause here with this idea that the boy is born with certain drives or traits, and if the culture admires and elevates that, which is not happening now in our culture, boys' assertiveness, industry, activity, willingness to risk and to throw themselves into the fire of life for a variety of purposes is not admired. It's considered bad or toxic in many circles. Not all circles. I still think there's a deep admiration for the heroic male spirit that is willing to give all, to go as far as is necessary in order to protect and serve not only the purpose of their ego, and this of course gets into the male ego. What is the male ego? And do we want to crush the male ego? Which is, that's an interesting common point of view, that the male ego needs to be crushed.
One thing I just came to mind as you were talking there, about when you were talking about the heroic male, and it made me think of myths and mythology from all cultures, and right from the Vikings to the Hindus to everything in between, even English mythology, Irish, Scottish, European, that's my kind of stuff. But it's interesting how mythology, you don't get a man sitting at home refusing to stand up and protect his family or whatever, or going out there. It's, the mythology just kind of supports that drive and, like you say, motivation and action that is innately in men. And like I've said to you, why anyone would want to inhibit that? As a woman myself, why would I want men to be inhibited from protecting and doing all the wonderful things that men do? Why would I want to inhibit that? Why would I want to suppress any man from just being themselves? Because if the roles were reversed, like they have been, and I've spoken to many women who've been oppressed by men, suppressed, the whole thing, and there's been like hundreds of years to try and balance that out. So now to see people trying to turn it upside down and do the same to men, it's so counterproductive, because we're all about balance. We all bring, as a woman, as a man, different things into the mix. And this thing that you said to me about boys unwilling, what is it about the growing up to be a man? Have you found in your experience that boys are, I would only say, fearful about growing up into being? What is it they fear about being a man and being, really evolving into that traditional kind of role that we would say?
Well, if you're a boy, and by the way, the two central words or concepts that you mentioned in humanity are regulation and balance. Mm-hmm. So one reason that there's a desire to suppress masculinity or toxic masculinity, and it's too bad that it wasn't presented differently, because it's really backfiring, because it's shaming, it's lumping men and masculinity and pairing the word toxic, which means that masculine traits are toxic. Well, not if they're well regulated. Now, we are all comfortable with women being a mother bear, you know, and tearing and lifting a car, whatever aggressivity that is needed. Women are not devoid of these traits either. They love and want to protect, and that's admired. The mother, you know, the mother bear, even if she does something bad, it's like, oh wow, look at that mother bear. She's protecting her cubs. So the protective value is honored. But if men are protective, there's a fear. And I think it's fear. So much of our culture is now fear-based. And of course, we're wired to be fear sensitive. That's in humanity. And it needs to be integrated and overcome so that you're not controlled by fear. So if you're afraid of men, then if you're not a man who deserves to be feared, think of how that feels. It's like, whoa, why would I want to be a bad man, big bad men who are bigger and stronger and beat people up, or they go to war and they do all these horrible things. But what's disconnected is the purpose. Even in schools, here's an example where the virtue, let me be careful here, the virtue of appropriate aggression. How about that? That if kids fight now in schools, they are both equally wrong, regardless of context. And the administrators, well, not 100%, but most of my work with schools has been to discover that administrators don't want to find out the morality of the conflict. So if a boy, let's say, stands up and fights for something, a group interest or his own interest, or protecting someone, all they see is the two boys are fighting. They don't see who started it. All the moral struggle of sorting that out is abandoned by school administrators that go by this simple rule: oh, if you're fighting, they're both suspended. Well, why don't you want to find out what happened? And I think that's a failing. What do you think of that?
That's absolutely shocking. And how does that help resolution of problems and conflicts for the rest of their life? And how do teachers, who evidently have done a little bit of psychology for children, how do they support that? How can a teacher go, it doesn't matter, you know, you're both fighting, that's it. Not like, well, I've been bullied for, you know, 6 months and I've just cracked, and now I've just stood up for myself, and now I've stood up for myself, now I'm in trouble. How will that serve a personality and a character to be built with that kind of oppression?
Well, where did you get your common sense? I mean, of course that's true, and it's been going on for thousands of years. Even Solomon figured out how to settle the conflict, to find out the truth of the two mothers that were claiming ownership of the child. And by threatening to cut the child in half, the real mother said, okay, it's not mine. And of course, he knew that the real mother would stand up, would surrender in order to save the child. And that was very clever. Of course, it's just one example. Here's an example of the girls, the same thing. Girls who do reputation damage. I got a referral once of a girl who was accused of that, but it was totally fabricated. We discovered that. I informed the school and I said, what are you going to do about this girl who is ravaging? And you send this healthy girl to me, a child psychiatrist, and I'm telling you she's been victimized by this assailant. And what are you going to do? And they said, well, we don't know what to do with that. And I said, well, figure it out. So I don't know where that comes from, but it's some type of hope that if you punish everybody the same, that's somehow equality. Maybe that's the equality obsession. We have to punish everybody the same. But the boys, a boy needs to be rewarded for his courage. Girls do too, but the boys are on a path of holding up the sky. This is an American Indian phrase, that men need to hold up the sky. And if you're a boy and you're a little bit anxious, you're not really eager to join the troop. You know, you'd like to maybe be a girl, or you would identify with female interests, because the path to manhood is full of risk, increased risk. The world has been made by men who are willing to risk things that we modern people would never consider. And that's women too. They were risk takers, but it was the men who were in the lead. They were the ones that were more active, pushing, advancing civilization, thinking of ideas and things. These are all kind of what you'd call masculine dominant traits. And if those traits are disadvantaged or shamed, or if you're told, oh, girls should be 50-50. Like in astronomy, there's this preponderance of men. Now the boys are being pushed aside, the male competitors, and girls are being given spaces under this equity construct that everybody has to be 50-50. Now, they don't do it with bricklayers and high-risk male jobs, but I don't know why astronomy, but anyway, that's kind of to a political or cultural issue about how men and women are the same. We need to have women shoulder to shoulder with men, 50-50 in all endeavors. When I was in the Army, there was a debate about women in combat and what effect does that have on combat effectiveness. And the political interest overtook the common sense or scientific interest of, is this a good idea? So there's lots of examples. If we go away from just male development, there's lots of examples.
You just reminded me of a story about the military and women. And you probably know this after being in the forces yourself, but evidently if you have women in specialized units and they're sent in, men have had historically, I don't know about now, have had this, there's a moment of hesitation. So if you've got women going into attack and you've got like something coming at you, men hesitate because there's an innate thing, an innate protective reaction to seeing a woman that you do not want to shoot. And so they basically used women because it would make them kind of hesitate and give them a slight advantage of, a few seconds or a second. And that's what they did. And again, it's a terrible thing, again, to exploit it. Just not, because some of those men, I mean, it's again, just following their natural, their innate. I mean, you were saying earlier on about, I really liked what you said earlier on. Maybe you can say it again about, because for me, my divine masculinity, masculine spirituality is, again, an idealized kind of thing, and it's just my utopian dream thing. But what you said about science and genetics and that kind of whole difference of what I look at the spiritual side, but the way we are wired, the way we are born, our DNA. Tell me a little bit more about that again. So it's like the feet on the ground scientist regarding kind of my kind of lovely little utopian vision about how men could be and what the genetics actually dictate. Tell me a bit more about
that. You're right about this core response of what I'd call the healthy male psychology is to rush to confront whatever it is needs to be confronted, a willingness to go forth and take care of things. And I guess you can say that's core, central to the psychology, something genetic. I think that it can be inspired in women too, but it's stronger in boys. Boys are prone to expansive grandiosity. They want so badly to be bigger, stronger. They're ashamed that they're small, but they know they can overcome that shame by growing up, and they see models into the future of how they can achieve that. They're willing to stick up for different things. And of course, in the socialization of boys, there's a fair amount of battling that goes on. Girls have their own version of that battling, but boys kind of condition each other into being able to take pain. Men can take pain and persist. And it's like, if you take this archetypal, let's call it archetypal, that's Jung's term. It means some kind of blend of spiritual, genetic, deep-seated in the soul, in the center of the human being. The male human being is something that wants to be a hero to their team, to their girl, to their parents, to their community. That they want to overcome maybe a sense of shame, and shame is a big issue in human nature. And the way you do that is by developing yourself and showing the world, look at me, I can do it. I'm willing to stick my neck out for you, and in return, you have to admire me and love me and give me high position, so that there's that salve. The boy gets the salve of admiration or glory. That's why there's all this talk of glory you hear in historical narratives. It goes back thousands of years that men want glory. And you can say, well, that's just male ego. That's narcissism. They just want to dominate. And actually, domination isn't a part of that. I think it's more love. And if you look at military units, they studied the Marine Corps, and they found the units that were most effective were those who had a love bond, a brotherly love bond that caused them to extend and risk themselves beyond the units that had no such bond, where you might say mercenaries have no bond except to money, and whereas a bonded, if you love something. So I think it's back to love, not domination. And this is misunderstood.
Very misunderstood.
Oh, here comes the bad man. He's toxic. But it's more complicated than that.
So one thing I'd like to say is, because it just came up, so I'm going to say it, because people who watch this and the kind of women who I know might watch this, when you say, like, how men go through pain, obviously Robert Sands knows that women also go through pain. So don't just think because he's talking about, the pain that men's going through, we're talking about divine masculinity. He knows all the pain that women go through: physical pain, birth pain, emotional pain, the pain of, what we would call male oppression and suppression. So, okay, just to clear that in case anyone thinks that, it's kind of not balanced, because of course it is. One thing I'd like to say about a thing I only heard yesterday, and I thought, well, this is such great timing because I'm talking to you today. There was a woman talking about this was a woman on the radio, and she was a psychologist, and she was saying how when women are absent, men basically will be themselves. The kind of the pressure that is on men. And I find it really interesting, because being a woman myself, you don't tend to think as a woman that you're putting pressure on a man. But what you're saying here about how men are really driven to please their lover, their wife, whoever it is, they want that kind of love bond. But like you say, it's so totally underestimated and misunderstood. And this woman was saying, if you take women away, men are just like, I can just relax and I can just be myself, and there isn't this constant drive. Would you agree with that?
Well, I really think women have a moderating effect on men. That's probably where civilization comes from. There's a balancing, yin yang type of thing, where men, if you let young men run in groups without the influence of civilization, and I guess we're saying, well, what, I think the presence of girls and women with men changes them in a positive way. That's the source of socialization. Where do you get socialized? It's from your mother. Your mother, whom you want to please. If you have a love attachment, you want to please the mother. And of course, if you're trying to emancipate, you have to discover that you can't always please your mother. You have to become your own person. So there is a drive to separate, emancipate, and become your own man. This thing, oh, I've got to become my own man. And the girls have the same lament. They want to become their own woman, and they want to have their own life. But the Lord of the Flies type of analysis would suggest that if you leave young men alone in groups, they're going to be less civilized. They're going to be more primitive, more aggressive, more conflict prone. And the presence of women and girls is highly civilizing. So, you can say that men left to their own devices would be evil. I don't know about that, because why would, maybe one of the cultural issues is that men are detaching from and you could say women are abandoning men, which is, I don't know if that's fair, or men are failing to rally to the challenge of winning a woman's love. I think that's more where it's at, that men are being so discouraged and shamed that they're becoming incels, these incelibate men. I think that's the right term.
Yeah, absolutely.
They've given up. They've given up. They don't see any way to win, and so they're retreating. And that's a terrible mistake for a culture to abandon men. And actually, boys are more, this is just a clinical fact, that boys are more developmentally loaded with burden. They develop more slowly. They have more developmental disabilities. There are a number of disorders are 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1 more in males than females. So in a way, girls and women are genetically superior, not to stimulate a competition about who's best, but the boys are pretty much ignored, except by their mothers, their sisters, their grandparents. So there are plenty of people loving the boys and bringing them along, and the fathers. Hopefully the fathers love their sons. But there's a cultural attitude of abandoning boys to their lot.
It's what you said there is one thing I wanted to say earlier, and I'm glad you said it, because I'd forgotten to mention it. It's the crucial role, isn't it, of the father as well. The mother's got that crucial role, like you said in the other video, right at the beginning, and then the father as the role model, taking young boys. And obviously we're not we're generalizing a little bit here, but obviously we're talking about concepts. But that role model of these parents and all the research that's been done on boys that do not have father figures, that just go wild, and there's no holds barred. There's just no structure. It's like chaos almost. And they don't know how to be good partners. They don't know how to be good fathers. They don't know how to love their child. They don't know how to speak to their child in a loving way. It's and then I suppose we have to, give a round of applause to all the men that do, all the men that adore their families and put all that support in. But the incels thing, I'd like to explore that a bit more. I know we're running out of time, but the incel, because you were saying about Lord of the Flies, and one thing about society that seems to have disappeared is, not everyone is equal. Not everyone is. you can't kind of say, oh, everyone's going to be, you know, 6 foot tall and everyone's going to be this and they're all going to have these skills. And that seems to have disappeared. You know, when I was at school, it was like no holds barred. You were told that you were good at that or bad at that. You were actually said, that's not your skill set. This is not your skill set. We're not going to do that with you. And I believe they do that in China. You know, they kind of they weigh the children up and they go, okay, you're going into music, you're going into maths, you're going into gymnastics, you're going into finance, and then once they've been assessed, they then go on this trajectory of their skill set. And I find that Lord of the Flies thing and the incels, it's a matter of, we're not all equal. We don't all do the same thing. Some men are, I shouldn't, maybe I'm going to say it. Some men, you know, they haven't got a lot to offer. They haven't developed themselves to a point where, you know, they've got a lot to offer emotionally, or, you know, just, you know, anything. And nor have some women. But sometimes they're just, people find each other. But, you know, you've got the jocks and you've got the nerds at school, and so be it. You know, this whole thing about trying to make everyone, you know, somehow the same. What do you think about that?
Well, one thought is that maybe we could have a talk in the future about identity formation. Yeah. How do we grow and identify and become who we are? Which is a long process of interacting with the real world, that you bump up against what you're good at, what you're not good at, you get feedback. And similar to what you were describing, that I always thought of it as European, but I think the Chinese do it too, is that they realistically assess kids and steer them guide them in a direction that fits with their competencies. And the premise that we all are the same and equal is it's a delusion. It's really psychological communism, you might say. It's this belief that we all should be equal. Why? I mean, it's totally at odds with reality.
Absolutely.
Plus, it makes no sense, but it's a very attractive and currently promoted, highly promoted idea that we have to force equality in the world, even if it means crushing those who are most capable of defending us and advancing us. It's very discouraging to be a bright, successful person. And if you think you're bad because you excel, you hold back, you inhibit your full power. Here's a little, maybe I guess we have to stop, but
let me just check the time and then
playing tennis with a woman, men inhibit their play. You should never, if you want to improve your game, don't play down, play up, and you'll be challenged and beaten. And so, but if you're playing with a woman, you don't hit the ball as hard because you inhibit. You do not want to, it's similar to the military. You inhibit that killer instinct, which is necessary on the battlefield. You do not want to have an inhibited workforce.
Absolutely.
And that's interesting that you brought that up about how the presence of women changes the behavior of men. It's also why women make better spies.
Yeah,
women make much better spies than men. Women can manipulate men in the spy arena. Now I'm going off on a very tiny topic, but
and I know we have to stop, unfortunately, but so we'll bring it to an end here, and